So welcome, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. So today's session is going to be a little over an hour. We'll have some time for questions and answers throughout the presentation and also at the end of the presentation. And just so everybody is aware, the session will be recorded. So you'll have an opportunity to look at the recording after or share it with colleagues that couldn't make it for today's session. So before we get started, we encourage you to really type in your name, organization, where you're joining us from in the chat box. There's people from all over Canada joining today. It gives us a better idea of who's joining. It's nice to see who's able to join and also give us an idea of the regional scope. And if you have any questions, again, please feel free to use the chat box as well. We'll stop periodically with myself and some colleagues on the line to answer any questions. I see that we have a few people using the chat box. Hi, Janet from, I believe Janet is Janet Kranz, and Alexander Bridges from Temiskaming, Titania from Gatineau. Welcome, welcome everyone. So for some housekeeping for today, we will share the presentation slides following today's session. We'll have, as I said, a few moments to answer any questions, but at any time, again, feel free to send questions in the chat box and myself or our colleagues will be happy to answer. And just so you're aware, we do have a Twitter handle at Canadian or CDN Women. FDN, the Canadian Women Foundation. So you're more than welcome to retweet or tweet on Twitter. And again, we will have the recorded version of the session and we'll post that on our website and also through YouTube. And we'll share that with everybody who's registered today. And you can share it with your colleagues as well. So my colleague, just to introduce myself, I will have the video on for the first portion of the presentation. My colleague, Sally, is also in the webinar and will help answer some of the questions in the pop-up chat box. And I'll let her introduce herself. Before we get to that, just introduce myself. My name is Sigal Dwele, and I'm the Director of the Investment Readiness Program here at the Canadian Women's Foundation. And I'm based in Toronto, the traditional territories of many nations in Toronto, including the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty, which was signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. And to tell you just a little bit about myself, I've worked mainly with entrepreneurs and had a varied career working in the federal government, the nonprofit sector, and most recently around the local food and farming sector, building community and regional food systems, as well as helping food businesses in the sector kind of start up and scale up their entrepreneurial businesses. So I'm really grateful to be here with you all today and really be part of the session. And I'd also now like to turn it over to my colleague, Sally, who is the manager of the Investment Readiness Program, or the IRP as we call it.
Hi, bonjour everyone. So as Sigal mentioned, I'm Sally Demashki. I'm the manager of the Investment Readiness Program here at the Foundation. Je suis aussi disponible en français si vous avez des questions. On aura une session demain en français qui sera exactement l'information présentée aujourd'hui, mais en français à 14h30 heure avancée de l'Est. So I am based in Ottawa, the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. And before joining the foundation, I was working on supporting refugee welcome and integration in Ottawa. And I will be supporting with questions today and available as well after, as I mentioned, for questions in English or in French as well.
Great, thank you, Sally. And before we get started today, I do want to start today's session by also acknowledging that many of us are located in traditional and ancestral unceded territory across Canada, and we want to recognize the role that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people have played and continue to play as stewards and guardians of the land, upon which we all gather and live and work and play. It is really with great respect of this role that we start our work and today's session, knowing that our relationships need to be improved and taking into account the continued impacts of systemic racism and colonization, that ongoing violence towards Indigenous women constitutes genocide, as stated in the report on the inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women. And for us at the Canadian Women's Foundation, it's important that we state this, because our work is, as we move forward, being influenced and adapted according to the calls for action from both the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the inquiry on murdered and missing Indigenous women. And that's important for myself and for all of us to think about how our work and our relationships can be improved and can really increase in scope with this acknowledgement and understanding of the truth of the history of Canada and the truth of the ongoing relations between its government and First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So as we kick off the rest of the session, this is a bit of a roadmap for today's webinar, and it'll include a quick overview of the Canadian Women's Foundation, and then we'll jump into kind of the broader Social Finance Fund, give some context, which is the Social Finance Fund is in development by the federal government, and then an overview of the Investment Readiness Program itself, and some examples or case studies of using social finance. And then from there, I'll turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Sally, on the line to delve a little deeper into how to apply for the third and final application round of the Investment Readiness Program, our approach to funding, our eligibility criteria, and we'll highlight some current social ventures that are being funded by the Canadian Women's Foundation. And we'll also be sure to take questions during the session and also at the end of the session. So feel free to post questions in the chat box. And if we can't get to all of them, we'll have some time at the end of the presentation, and also you're more than welcome to send us questions. So just to give you some background on the Canadian Women's Foundation, it was set up in 1991 to fill a gap for women's philanthropy. Today, we work in 4 key areas, focusing on women and girls, as well as those that identify as women and girls. And we work primarily in preventing gender-based violence, alleviating poverty, and supporting women's economic development, and promoting inclusive leadership and championing girls' empowerment. And we also have a focus on supporting communities or organizations which perhaps have the least access to this kind of philanthropic funding. And we do try to make that one of the key criteria with which we look at our work. And we also try to consider the location of different organizations across Canada. And I do want to also just point out that we did update our strategic plan here at the Canadian Women's Foundation, and some of our kind of 5 key strategic priorities, 3 of them are quite similar for over the last few years: attracting and inspiring philanthropy, investing in women and girls, building the capacity in the sector. But there are 2 other strategic priorities that are the focus of the foundation, which is advocating and mobilizing for change, and also amplifying the national conversation through thought leadership. So moving forward, the foundation will be taking on a broader role, looking at advocacy and ways to mobilize on multiple levels for all types of societal change, and to get closer and closer to gender equity. And through amplifying our national conversations, which includes our senior executive team being present at kind of multiple tables, so that information about how to gather our strength in terms of women's equity can be shared through bigger and bigger circles and influence across Canada is quite a priority as well. So I'll just turn over to the Social Finance Fund and provide some context on the broader fund and what it means. So social finance, a means to an end. Just to begin, I just want to be aligned on some of the language, because social finance could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And there's really no best way or one way that's right about what social finance is. And so when we're talking about social finance, I really mean we're talking about two key things, which is repayable investment. And by repayable investment, we're talking about investment in the form of a loan, for example, which is money you take up front for some positive impact and then promise to repay that loan at some point in the future. And so this is the type of repayable investment that also seeks a social, environmental, or cultural impact. So when we're talking about social investment or social finance and using this language, we're referring to that sort of repayable investment that seeks some sort of positive societal impact or change. So just to provide some kind of case studies about how social finance as a tool can be used and paint a little bit of a picture, on the left-hand side, you'll see some examples of different ways of how social finance can be used in different organizations. For example, purchasing an asset, launching a social enterprise, or scaling an enterprise. And I do want to say that these aren't the only ways to use social finance, but these are some of the more common ways that organizations that we see are using social finance. And so the first story is the YWCA in Toronto. They raised $1 million and used it to build an affordable housing complex. And they used this facility to work with low-income women, women with mental health issues, and women-led Indigenous families. And what YWCA does is that, or what they did is they made up the difference between what residents can pay to make sure it's affordable for them and what the market rate for rent would have been with government rent supplements. And so YWCA is doing what they're using the rent from residents and money from the rent supplements to pay down the community bond over the next 10 years. And just to describe what a community bond is essentially little loans from stakeholders in a community, so that have a vested interest to support a particular community. So it's going out to communities and individuals who believe in your work as an organization and providing a literal financial support. And not necessarily asking stakeholders or those in the community for a donation, but asking them to invest in a small amount into your project. It could be anywhere from 500, 1,000, or up to 5,000 to invest in this project, say over the next 5 years, or whatever the term may be. And they'll go ahead and repay that with a little bit of interest, or YWCA paid a little bit of interest and could then take advantage of having a lower interest rate, say 2 or 3 or 4% down the line. So that's kind of one example of how an organization used an asset to leverage their own kind of operational budget. And another example is, which you might all be familiar with and you're working on or have experience with, is launching a social enterprise. So an interesting example of using social finance as a tool is, launching this social enterprise from scratch, or scaling an existing social enterprise that you have within your organization. And Food Share is an organization, charity based right here in Toronto, that focuses on food justice and food insecurity in the Greater Toronto Area for those that are most affected by poverty and food insecurity in different communities. So many years ago, they decided to increase their revenue generation by purchasing a used bus from the TTC, or the Toronto Transit Authority, through a loan and other means in order to provide locally grown food at affordable rates to communities through a mobile food truck or food market, to be specific. So by launching the social enterprise, they were able to charge customers at a reduced rate, which included the transportation cost of operating the mobile food market. So after many years, and today, Food Share operates more than 10 mobile markets across the Greater Toronto Area and delivers thousands of fresh grown local healthy food to communities experiencing food insecurity. And so this social enterprise really helped to sustain their existing programming and continues to be a resilient and sustainable source of funding for the organization. Okay, just turning over now to the kind of broader social finance fund and providing some context. The first program, the social finance fund, is something that's really coming down the line from the federal government. And it's really an initiative through the Employment and Social Development Canada, which is a federal department. And the objective of the fund is to recognize that social finance is a tool and one of many tools. But it's poised to have a significant impact. And what the government is saying is that, well, we want to increase the amount of affordable capital for social, environmental, and cultural mission-based organizations. So the total amount that's anticipated, an anticipated commitment, I should say, from the Social Finance Fund is 755 million, which is coming from the federal government. And this comes alongside a 2-to-1 matching from the private sector. So the good news is that that matching component is that for all of us here on the session, you wouldn't be responsible or mandated for that 2-to-1 matching component. It's rather that social finance investors are going to need to demonstrate to the federal government in order to access that money an ability to fundraise from the private sector. So ultimately, for most of us on today's session, and for all of our organizations and partners we work with, is that we get to see the full 1.5 billion be available to us over the next 10 years. And that's the intent of the Social Finance Fund. And so the legal structures are quite open-ended and broad for the Social Finance Fund. So, which means if you are a nonprofit, a registered charity, a for-profit or a cooperative, or any type of hybrid of these, you would be eligible to ultimately access these social finance fund investments. And again, the way you would access that is through the social finance investor. And it would come in the form of, for example, a loan, a mortgage, a line of credit. It could be an equity investment into a for-profit entity. It could be a revenue sharing agreement or any other type of social finance tool. And one other good thing to look forward to is that the government is committing to offer this money at affordable rates to those social finance investors. And so what that allows the social finance investors to do is translate those savings into below market rate costs for organizations. And so if you were to go, say, to a traditional bank or a credit union as a charitable organization, you would probably today see a 7, 8, 9, or 10% interest rate on a loan that you may need to access if you are accessing that type of repayable capital. But through this initiative for the Social Finance Fund, you might now see something below that rate. So just for illustrative purposes, it could be as low as, say, 2, 3, or 4%. And so just explaining some of these kind of the roles of the different players in the Social Finance Fund. The social finance investors could be, for example, the Community Forward Fund. It could be an organization such as Verge Capital, which is based in London, Ontario. There's also an organization called Riza Capital based in BC, and St. John Community Investment Fund that's based in Atlantic Canada. So there are a whole range of social finance investors. I think there's up to 60 or a little over 60 investors that exist today across Canada. And there's also new social finance investors coming online every day. And so, you know, for example, Amplify Capital, Marigold Capital, and the Equity Fund are just a few that are also joining this list of social finance investors. So for most of us joining on the session today, that is either a charity or nonprofit, or perhaps a for-profit entrepreneur, we'd fall mostly into the red category of what's called a social purpose organization. And so the way you would access the Social Finance Fund is through these social finance investors. And so just there are 2 key points to reiterate here is that these arrows are really 2-sided arrows. And what that's trying to indicate is that you have investment flowing from green to red or from left to right. And you also have repayment flowing back in the opposite direction. Okay, and now sitting alongside that social finance fund is the Investment Readiness Program, is this recognition that this could become a great opportunity for a lot of charities, social enterprises, or nonprofits with a social mission. But a lot of these organizations may not be ready yet to access this type of repayable money or manage this type of repayable capital. So the federal government launched this 2-year pilot program, which is the Investment Readiness Program. And its aim is to really strengthen organizations' capacity to ultimately participate in this broader social finance marketplace. So the Investment Readiness Program is a $50 million non-repayable capital program. And by non-repayable, I just want to stress the difference here is that it is a grant program, whereas the Social Finance Fund is a repayable fund, which means that it is not a grant program and the funds would have to be repaid. So it is a pilot program, and it ends this upcoming March 31st, 2021. And again, if you're a nonprofit, a charity, a for-profit social enterprise or entrepreneur, a cooperative, or a hybrid of any of these organizations, you would be eligible to receive this Investment Readiness Program money. And specifically, when it comes to the IRP, it is a one-time grant to progress your organization to become more investment ready. So it's really not meant to be a regular operating grant, for example, to pay for staff costs or payroll, or to pay for rent, or something to that effect. And it isn't meant to be the social finance fund either, so you wouldn't be able to purchase a building or equipment or any kind of major capital cost like that. But rather, it's really meant for you to access, for example, services, say legal services, business planning support, accounting services, or any type of testing or exploring of a social enterprise, say through feasibility study, so that you can build the case and improve your organization's investment readiness and ultimately, at some point in a future date, attract capital. So there are 5 organizations that are distributing funding of the Investment Readiness Program, which are the Community Foundations of Canada, which aims to support for-profit social entrepreneurs, but Community Foundations of Canada is also accepting applications from registered charities, nonprofits, cooperatives, and hybrid structure organizations. And so CFC, or Community Foundations of Canada, has actually just launched their final funding cycle. And I believe their applications close on October 9th. And if you'd like more information after the call, we'd be happy to share some more information about CFC's call for applications. Another organization that is part of this ecosystem of funding is Le Chantier de l'économie sociale, which is supporting specifically Quebec-based organizations. Unfortunately, there is no more funding committed or allocated by Chantier because they closed their applications for the remainder of the program. And then the 2 other funding organizations are National Association of Friendship Centers, which aims to support Indigenous friendship centers across Canada, and NACA, which is the National Aboriginal Capital Corporation, which aims to support Indigenous-led and owned social enterprises through their extensive network of more than 50 Aboriginal financial institutions working across Canada. And finally, later in the presentation or the session, my colleague Sally will really delve into our funding program, of course, in the application process. And the main difference between other funding organizations of the IRP is that we at the Canadian Women's Foundation, as a registered charity, is aiming to support women serving or women-led registered charities. However, for-profit and nonprofit organizations are eligible to apply if you partner with a registered charitable organization. And we'll get into the application process in more detail later in the presentation. And I think maybe now is a good time to pause for questions. I see that there's a few questions in the chat box. Okay, I see a question from Aja Mason. Are nonprofits without charitable status still eligible? Yes, nonprofits with charitable status are eligible to apply if you partner with a organization that has charitable status. So that organization should have a mandate or a mission that's relevant to your project or to the mission of your organization. And that charitable partner can be based anywhere in Canada, of course. And so the answer is yes. And I think Sally did answer the question there. Okay, and I think I see another question. Sorry, the questions are coming up. How has the Canadian Women's Foundation incorporated gender diversity into its work? For example, any inclusion of non-binary populations. That's a question from Abra. Thank you. That's a great question. And the Canadian Women's Foundation incorporates intersectionality and gender diversity through our funding decisions, through the application process, and through other grant streams as well. It's an approach we take through all of our decision making. There is a priority for this particular funding program of women who are any inclusion of, for example, of non-binary populations. That's a priority demographic, as well as there's three other priority demographics, which is Black women, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit women, and then women who have a disability. And so those are three areas of demographics that we're looking at for this particular funding program as priority areas. And as we get into the application details a little bit later, we'll go through the assessment criteria and some of the questions that are in the application itself. I think there's also another question here. I'll take this last one maybe before we get into the next section. The question is, can a charitable organization make one application for themselves and one with a partner? Good question. We are limited to only accepting one application from an organization. So if you're a charitable organization and you partner with another organization, you can only submit one application. Okay, I think those are all the questions that we have coming up right now. And if you do have any questions, continue to post them there in the chat box. We'll make sure to monitor them. And I'll turn it over now as we get into the next part of the presentation about the detailed application process, the next steps, and what to look for in your application, what we look for in your application, as well as some case studies and highlighting some current grantees or funding recipients that we're working with.
Thank you, Sagal, for providing some context. And I know there's a few questions about eligibility that have come up. I'll be talking about that in a few slides, and then if anything is unclear, I will feel free to type it in. So as I mentioned, I'll talk a little bit more about our approach to funding, some of the eligibility criteria, and also some more information about partnerships as it relates to partnering with a charity or for profit, and other options available if you're not eligible to apply through the Canadian Women's Foundation. So an overview of the RRP funding that's open right now. So it is the third and last cycle of the Investment Readiness Program funding through the Canadian Women's Foundation. As Sagal mentioned, it is a pilot, and so we had 3 cycles of funding set up for this funding. The deadline to submit a letter of intent application is October 2nd, 2020 at 11:59 Pacific time. It is a two-stage application using an online system. So the first stage is that letter of intent, and the second stage is a full application. And so we'll be connecting with a specific number of applicants that have made it through the second round. If you are experiencing any internet connectivity issues, or you're based in a, sorry about that, or if you're based in a remote or rural or isolated region and you'd prefer to fill out a Word version of the application, you can connect with me or Sagal, and we'll be happy to send you that Word version to make sure, we want to make sure that it is accessible. We do get a few questions about the online system sometimes, and to let you know, you can create an account online, and then you can share your login information within the organization within your organization or the organization you're partnering with, to be able to access all the different sections. And the application itself, you can save and return. You don't have to fill it out right away. I'll in a few slides, I'll show you the 3 sections that we have that you have to fill out to submit your application. And for this third and last cycle of RRP funding, we do have around 12 grants of up to $50,000 each that will be allocated. The successful social ventures will be notified in January, February 2020. And although, as Sagal mentioned, the pilot ends March 31st, 2020, we have received the green light from the government to allow projects to continue past that date since of COVID, and because the timelines of the projects are very tight. The funding has to be allocated and the money has to spend by March, but the activities can continue later that year, which is great because we know it's a difficult period for everyone, and we know that it can take quite some time to get set up and started with your activities. So our approach to funding. As Sagal mentioned, we do prioritize inclusion, and we want to address communities that face specific barriers. We do prioritize funding that address programming for women, girls, trans, two-spirit, and non-binary people. And in recognition of the long history of colonizations and racism and violence and exclusion, we do have priority communities. So we do look at programs that are looking to support First Nations, Métis, and Inuit women, girls, trans, two-spirit, and non-binary peoples, Black women, women living with disabilities, and also 2SL LGBTQI+ people. In terms of the investment readiness continuum, so this is something you'll see in your application, and we do refer to it quite a lot. So this is a continuum that was set up by the government to try to have a framework to identify where your projects are in terms of being investment ready. So there's the early stage innovation, which is really about exploring an idea and seeing if the gap that you're trying to fill really aligns with the solution. There's also strategic impact focus, which is looking at the feasibility of an idea and any community support that's needed to develop. There's impact sustainability. So this is really looking at the business model. Is there an opportunity to diversify funding and how to do that? Financial resilience, which is about revenue generation and setting up a legal structure and really looking at the ability of the project to scale and be replicated. And then investment readiness, investor ready, sorry, which is sustainable cash flow and assets. So really demonstrating that there is a track record for this social venture to be sustainable and to be able to network with prospective investors. So so you know, we are looking at projects that are at all stages. We do not prioritize a stage over another. So if you're in the early stage, there's no points per se that are lost. We really want to invest in you. And also we recognize that a lot of the folks that are joining today, if they're a charity and or even if you're a nonprofit, they may have not worked on a social enterprise before in the social finance sector, and this is new, and so you might be at the earlier stage, and that's okay. We are looking to still invest in you. So for the granting documentation, as I mentioned, once you log in online, we have 3 sections. So the first is really an organizational overview of you as an organization. We ask for program information, looking at the geographic area served, the individuals and community served, and also an overview of the amount that we're requesting. And then we have 7 proposal questions that are looking at getting a summary of what you're looking to do with this funding. And that includes some of the activities you'd like to do and some of the key partnerships. So these are the sections in more detail. So the organization overview, you'll see organization name, social purpose, social innovation, business initiative contact, SARI number. So a few basic information on the organization. Would like to mention here the eligibility criteria in terms of what type of organization you are. So through the Canadian Women's Foundation, if you have to be a registered charity or a qualified donee to be able to apply for funding. If you're not, you can partner with a charity or a qualified donee to be able to apply. If we recognize that can be a barrier and it's not accessible for everyone, and so this is why other organizations have different eligibility criteria. And so, for example, the Community Foundations of Canada, which is accepting right now applications, you don't have to be a registered charity or a qualified donee to access the funding. You can be a for-profit, you can be a nonprofit, you can be a co-op. They have more flexibility in the funding that they're able to allocate. If you have questions about your eligibility and you're unsure about where you fit and what it means, you are more than welcome to reach out to us. We actually encourage you, so it can be clear and you can really get a better sense of where you fit before you put in an application. So in the online application, the basic information here that we need is from that charity. So if you're partnering with an organization, you would be the partner agency, the program delivery organization, as we call it in our system, and the charity would be the grantee. And so here you see the organization name, the CRI number, the background information, and previous funding. That is all related to the grantee, so the charity or the qualified donee. I see there's a few questions. I see Segal is answering them. I'm going to go through the next 2 sections and then I'll pause to take all your questions since I'm sure there might be a few. And then program information here is if you're partnering with a charity or qualified donee, this would be specific to your program. So this isn't about the charity or the qualified donee. This is about your program. So we're looking for the name, geographic area served, the total budget. So just an overview of a few key information about your project. We're not requesting a detailed budget yet. This will be something that you would submit if you make it through the second stage and submit a full budget and full application. And we do have a template for that. And then you see here, we have a few questions in terms of the primary purposes of your project and also a question about United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So if you have any questions about these questions and they feel unclear, again, you can reach out to us and we can help you identify what might be the preferred answer, the good fit for your application. And then these are the proposal questions. So there's 7 of them. So you'll see here, we've given the question and the guidance on your answer. So this table is available on our website, and it's called the guidance, I think, application guidance. I can't remember now the name of the document. I'll show you after. There's a link to our website, and you can access this document to see the full overview of the eligibility criteria, what we look for, and also you can see how we look at proposals and some of the criteria we have to select the successful projects. So the first questions, please describe your social purpose, social innovation initiative, and what key persistent issue it aims to address. So here we have some guidance. We're really looking for clarity and really good understanding of what you're looking to do. I skipped the first, which is a summary of your social purpose, social innovation, or business initiative. So here would be really, if you had to describe to the public or someone who's unfamiliar with your project what you're trying to do, this would be the opportunity. The second question is about partnerships. So something that we did see not necessarily clear in some of the applications we received before is when there was multiple partners, or if you're a for-profit partnering with a charity, vice versa. It wasn't always clear what everyone's role was in the project, and how there was mission alignment and there was common values of both organizations. So if you could really tell us if there are partnerships, how you're partnering and what everyone's role is in the project and how they might contribute to the project. The third question is, how will you generate revenue? So we know this can be challenging, especially, charities were used to designing programs, and so the generation of revenue is not necessarily something that comes naturally. But this would be very important within this funding, because it is meant to lead to eventually an investment in the social finance fund. So really providing clear understanding of how you plan to eventually have a revenue out of this project. And if you feel like you're not sure if your idea will eventually generate revenue and not sure how to describe it, again, we're happy to help. You can connect with us. But it also sometimes what happens is it is a program and not necessarily a social venture. And so it doesn't necessarily align with the Investment Readiness Program. Fourth question, describing how you plan to spend the funding. So here, again, an overview of how you want to use the funding. We do have a list of eligible and ineligible expenses in our frequently asked questions document. Again, it's available on our website, and it can provide you more details. If you're unsure of some of the expenses, again, you can reach out to us and we can let you know. But since this is an overview, we can definitely work out those details with you if you make it to the second stage. The fifth question is looking at whether your group organization is led by the community it serves. So if the decisions and direction provided are by the community it serves, and if you can then share the decision-making process and how you ensure representation. So we definitely look at how the organization's leadership reflects the work and the diversity of our community. That includes the overall governance and also the projects team. We really value and support organizations who are really making sure that the people in the community are represented in their teams. And so that's definitely something that we want to learn more about. Definitely, specifically if you're working, for example, with Indigenous communities, and are there Indigenous staff on your team? If not, how are they involved in the project? Are they really part of designing the project? So telling us a bit more about that. And then number 6, how are you encouraging equity, diversity, inclusivity in your work and the work of your organization? So again, telling us more about how you approach your work, how you consider the different realities that different communities face and live every day. And then the last one is in terms of COVID. So telling us more about any challenges or potential risks that you might foresee because of the pandemic, especially because we know it's a very unstable time and we're not sure what might happen. But if you could tell us more about how you see it potentially impacting your work and describing any mitigation strategies that you have. And just so you know, we have been working closely with the projects we funded to provide flexibility and working with them to adapt. So we've been very flexible with moving the budgets around or even changing the project and the scope to make sure that we're really supporting you and setting you up for success. So I'm going to pause right here because I see there's quite a few questions. And I see that Sigal has answered a few. Okay.
Okay, so some of the questions, thank you for that, Sally. Some of the questions have been answered, and I think a few questions have yet to be answered. There's one question from, I believe it was Abra or Aja, that I'm going to postpone until a little bit later. It's in the later part of the presentation, and we'll talk about some of the expert service providers that provide support to organizations that would want to build their capacity in terms of launching or building a social enterprise.
Thank you, Sigal. I do see, and thanks for clarifying the names of the documents, which I completely forgot about, even though I've read them a million times. So we do have grant guidelines, specific guidance document on the application itself, and then frequently asked questions on our website. The frequently asked questions have quite a number of details, so I really encourage you to take a look. And that table that I just presented is available online as well in the specific guidance document.
So just to clarify, there was a question about the dates in February. So if you're successful in the first stage of the application process, which is the LOY, you'll be notified in October whether or not you've been selected to move on to the second stage of the application, which is the full application stage. And then at that point, after the full application stage, all applicants will be notified in February whether or not they've been selected. February 2021, not February 2020, which was in the slide, which is already passed, if whether or not you've successfully received funding. And just to add to that, I believe Janet had a question about dates in March. So the question was, the federal government has extended deadline beyond March. I was wondering if they provided a new deadline. And so I believe maybe if I'm understanding the question properly, is that if you are selected for funding and you receive that funding in February 2021, you have well into the end of 2021, so December 31st, 2021, to complete your project. So that's past the March 31st deadline. So even though the Investment Readiness Program, pilot program, formally is proposed to end March 31st, 2021, if you receive funding next year in February, you can continue your projects well into the end of the year next year. And I believe Sally is going to talk a little bit about that and the deadlines and the timelines a little bit later in the presentation as well. Yes,
and I see just quickly two more questions here. If I understand well, these grants are $50,000, seed capital and non-refundable. Yeah, so these are grants. You don't have to repay them back. They're grants. They're not repayable investments. And for folks who need to partner with a charity, is the onus on us to find a partner, or is there support for finding a partner as well? So you can definitely connect with us. And if we have worked with an organization or we know of an organization in the area, we can definitely recommend. So feel free to connect with us if you are interested in partnering and you're unsure of where to go in your community to find that resource. And then another question around, does an organization that is applying have to recruit private sector donations? as it talked about the 2-for-1 from feds plus private sector. No. So this is, for context, it was to tell you more about the Social Finance Fund, which will be launched eventually, and is the reason why the Investment Readiness Program was created, was to get social purpose organizations like yourself ready to eventually access that funding, because right now it can be hard if you've never created a business initiative, a social enterprise, to be at that level where you can access investors' capital. And so the goal is to get you closer to that. And so you don't have to look for donations. You don't have to do any of that. You can just apply for the funding. That being said, if there are other interested donors who would like to invest in the idea that you have, you can most definitely include that in your application, saying that you might have a potential funder. And so, for example, if you want to explore the feasibility of a social enterprise and you want to access $50,000 from us, and you know that a local funder or another funder wants to potentially invest another $50,000, $100,000, you can tell us that that's a potential, but you don't have to look for another piece of funding. Great. So
yep, and I think there was just one more question from Abra. What is meant by do not include annual shelter donations? And Abra, I think I'll answer that question maybe after the presentation, because I just want to make sure where that reference is coming from. And so just to clarify that, we'll make sure we get that answered.
Sounds good. So just wanted to provide a bit of context in terms of what we fund and do not fund. Previously, I mentioned that we don't request a full budget for the first stage of the application, but we do have some eligible and eligible expenses. So this is an overview of what is not eligible. So individuals, federal, provincial, or municipal government agencies and school boards, they can be involved with the project, but the grant has to be done to the community organization. For profit-based organizations, again, they're eligible. They just have to partner. Conferences, projects that are outside of Canada, and projects that are not primarily focused on women, girls, trans, two-spirit, and non-binary people. So if you're an organization that provides services to different populations, that's okay, as long as the project itself is focused on those who identify as women, two-spirit, non-binary, girls, and trans. So there's, again, that list is available in our frequently asked questions. I'm just seeing, our digital frameworks or website viewed as capital expenditures? No. If the website or any kind of software or training that you need that is specifically for your initiative, that is eligible. And business development is definitely eligible as an expense. Oh, I thought I had a eligible expense. I did not include that, but again, if you look at our frequently asked questions, you can see examples of what is eligible. Feasibility studies, business development, training, softwares, a lot of marketing expenses. These are some common expenses that a lot of our successful projects have put forward, and they're definitely all eligible. So if you have more questions, you can take a look at our website. I'm hoping that my screen share will work and lead us there. So just making sure that you do see our website page right now. Gal, if you can maybe let me know.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. So if you go on our website here, you'll see if you want to apply, you can click here and it will ask you to, if you already have a profile, you'll be able to log in And if not, it will ask you to create an account, and you can do it right here. And then the documents that we mentioned, they're located right here. So you have the grants criteria, specific guidance for applications, frequently asked questions, and then we have previously recorded webinars here, and we'll be adding this webinar as well to our website. And then here you have more resources and information about the timelines. And as we mentioned, the community—
Hi, Sally. Sorry to disturb you. It's Michelle. We can't see the screen you're sharing right now.
Oh,
We're only
sorry
seeing
about
the
that.
presentation.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay. Can you see it now? Yes, okay, great. So sorry about that. So this is our Investment Readiness Program page. If you look through here, you can click here to access the online application. You can, if you have an account, you can log in, and if you don't, you can create an account. You'll see that if you have already applied for a grant through us or received funding, it's the same online system. And then here on the right are all the documents that we mentioned. So we have the grants criteria, the specific guidance for applications, which includes the table I just mentioned and showed you in the past 2 slides. And then we have our frequently asked questions here as well. And if you look down, there are a few previous webinars that we presented in March that you'll be able to take a look at. They're similar to this one, but we added a few more tips to this one, and we'll be adding the link to access this recording on our website as well. So here you'll see there's a few more details on the timelines, and we also did include a link to the Community Foundations of Canada Investment Readiness Program website, so you can access it on here. And they also have resources on their website in terms of frequently asked questions, guidelines for their application. And so you can take a look at that if you're not eligible for funding through us. Just going to go back to the presentation. And go through some of the resources available. Actually, I'll just see a question. So I have a question here. How do we distinguish between general marketing and marketing to make the enterprise more investment ready? So Rachel, I would say that depends on if the marketing activities are around making sure that your initiative is scaled or is ready for the market. And if it links back to your organization, then that's okay. But it really has to link back to your initiative that is generating the revenue. So I would say maybe if you want to connect with us offline and can ask you a few more questions, it really depends on what you're looking for and how it relates to the initiatives you have in mind. So we have a few more details here in terms of accessing resources. So of course, recognizing that setting up an initiative, social enterprise, most likely in this case is not something that's definitely that's necessarily accessible, and it can be quite overwhelming to navigate all the different activities that need to be done. So the Government of Canada has also funded expert service providers, which are basically different services that are doing work on social finance that were already doing this work and have been doing this work for quite some time, some newer, some older. And some have received additional funding to provide even more support. And so these are examples of different organizations that you can access. So to clarify, there's directories here that you'll be able to access through the presentation. And basically these are, there's coaches, so consultants, or there's also organizations themselves that you can consult to ask questions about your initiative that you want to set up, and you can use your funding to hire them. So for example, if you're at a stage where you want to do a feasibility study of your initiative, and you want to put something together and you want to use part of this funding to hire someone to help you with that. So you can definitely do that. And these expert service providers are meant, it's meant to be a place where you can go to find people more easily, because it's not necessarily something that's easy to find. So it's basically a directory. So these ones are some of the main ones that are on the government website, but there's actually more that are able to help you. So this is why we have this directory here. It's hosted by Innoweave, which is a leader in the social finance space. And if you go through them, you can select a location, you can select, they have different specialty based on the topic. So for example, if you want someone who can help with a food social enterprise, so you can find people who have different experiences and access the services through them. If you have questions about expert service providers and what they can do, you can let us know. And you know what it is, basically the way I would see it is they do have a fancy name, and it's great, but they're consultants, coaches there to help you. That's basically what it is. It's just they have that specific expertise in social finance and helping charities, nonprofits, co-ops, different types of social purpose organizations set up their initiatives and scale them up as well. And just to clarify as well, if you have someone in your community that you have worked with or you want to work with that offers these types of services that can help you with your initiative, but they're not listed here, that's okay. It doesn't have to be them. It's just this directory was meant to offer you a place to go to find that support, but you can also use someone else in your community. And again, to clarify, you don't have to use an expert service provider or an external consultant to put together an application and help you with your initiative. If you have all the resources in-house, you can also just use that. You don't have to access external support. So here are just a few details around the partnerships. We do get a lot of questions around that. So charities and qualified donees, again, are eligible for funding. And if you're not, you can partner with a charity qualified donee to apply for funding. So for-profits are eligible to collaborate with charities. Again, we mentioned earlier, if you could provide some details on your partnership, if you have any, to make sure we have a good understanding of how you're partnering and how your work aligns with their work. And again, if something is unclear, you can connect with us and we can give you more details. If Sagal mentioned these different funders at the beginning of the presentation, definitely encourage you to take a look at their investment readiness funding, because we all have different eligibility criteria. Unfortunately, Le Chantier de l'Économie Sociale is not taking any funding applications anymore. They have exhausted their resources. But if you are a Quebec organization, you are eligible to apply for funding through us. You don't have to apply through Le Chantier. So the good news is there's still funding available for Quebec organizations. And the same applies to the Community Foundations of Canada, which has its cycle open right now. So in terms of next step, here's an overview of the timeline. This is also available on our website. So the letter of intent application is due October 2nd. We'll be reviewing in October those applications and shortlisting proposals for the second stage. We'll be notifying everyone who's applied on October 19th, and we'll be inviting as well the successful proposals for stage 2 on October 19th, giving around 3 weeks until November 6th for a full proposal. And then we're doing the internal review in November, December, January. And then both unsuccessful and successful projects will be notified in February. And we're also looking at having the agreements signed by early March. I'm going to pause here to see any questions. I think Sigal has answered them. Thank you. And then I'm just looking at the time. Okay,
Yeah, just looking at the chat box, Sally, and I don't think there are any more questions. So
good. Okay. So I will now, something we really wanted to do is highlight a few of our current great social ventures that we funded. And we think it can also really help give you some ideas and in terms of how you might want to frame an initiative that you have in mind, or an initiative that you already have been working on and that you want to scale. So the first is, I apologize for the formatting. The first is WIN. So Women in Need Society is based in Alberta, and they actually had their initial proposal for their initiative was changed because of the pandemic. And so they've set up an e-commerce social enterprise, which is a subscription-based box service, which has been highly successful. And they did all of this within a few months. So that was really fascinating to watch. And they've actually have their website here, so you can take a look as well at the work they're doing. And this is meant to provide income for their organization. They ensure that low-income women have access to free clothing, household items, and furnishing to make their house a home. This one is Alliance des femmes de la francophonie canadienne, which is the French Alliance of Francophone, the Alliance of Francophone Women in Canada. And they're looking at doing a market study to validate the profitability of a social enterprise to provide French language, childcare services, and as well as respite services for caregivers. So they were just funding through the second cycle, so they're just starting now to do this work, and they're based in Ontario. This one is the Yellowknife Women's Society, was also funded through the second cycle, and they're buying a hotel that will be converted into housing for women transitioning out of homelessness. And so they're looking at using some of the space to offer business development opportunities and create a revenue stream so that they can fund their important work. And they're based in Northwest Territories. And this one is an example of a partnership between a nonprofit and a registered charity. So the Newfoundland Aboriginal Women's Network and Ulnoeg Education Center. So they're looking at the feasibility of an existing community workshop that they have put together. They want to see if this is something that can turn into a social enterprise to provide sustainable revenue for the organization. And they're based in Newfoundland and Labrador. So these were some examples of projects that we funded. We have 28 projects funded at the moment. You can take a look at our website to read on the other projects. So COVID-19. To give you a bit of context on what we've done to address the pandemic, and again, we recognize that many of you are on the front line and doing a lot of work to address the pandemic and the disproportionate impact it has had on many of the communities that you serve. Some of the things that we've done for example, in terms of budgeting, is working with the projects to provide flexibility with the expenses. So switching around the admin fees, the PPE. We are very flexible with that. We know many were worried about having to change, for example, in-person activities to online or changing how they're doing the activities, but we are there for you to set you up for success. So we've been very flexible with the funding. And then the project activities. So we know the timelines are a bit confusing and not necessarily natural, because we're providing funding and then we're saying the pilot ends in March, but you can continue working, and then the final report is actually due for the third cycle, basically when you start. So we're adapting and we're updating the projects we're working with on an ongoing basis based on what the government is telling us and what is happening with COVID-19. So again, we are very flexible with that if things need to change. So although we do have some timelines in terms of when the money has to be spent by, we have flexibility with the actual project activities. The other thing is the pivoting the projects. So we have worked with the current social ventures to change and adapt to the new realities. And again, we recognize that there are some, for example, in-person consultations or activities that really need to change. And so we're working with them to make sure that we're addressing that. And then capacity building. So we are working on capacity building with our current grantees to make sure that they feel supported, and creating opportunities for them to learn that are really tailored to what is happening now and the arising needs, and keeping an open communication between us and them to make sure that we're there to support. We do have some, we're also planning some sessions to help overall the sector to learn more about social finance and what it means for you as organizations and for your communities. So definitely stay tuned for that as well. So this is tips for successful application. So based on the applications that we've received in the first and second cycle, we thought it'd be helpful to share some of our lessons learned. So the first one is connecting with us. So, we definitely encourage you to connect with our team before submitting an application, because it will help you first see whether this might be the right fit for your idea, but also we can help you provide more context in terms of what you need to clarify or emphasize in your application. And so definitely encourage you to connect with us before you submit. Providing realistic timelines. So again, many of you do incredible work with very limited resources, and sometimes have to do it really quickly with almost no time to think through the timelines. We do want to set you up for success. So we do really encourage you to provide realistic timelines. And so what that might mean is focusing on 1 or 2 or 3 activities and not necessarily doing everything. So some projects, wanted to set up a full business and open a store in 3-4 months. That's not realistic. It also adds incredible stress on you, and we don't want that. So be realistic. If you're unsure of what it means for your work, connect with us. We can help you with that. But we really prefer that you focus on specific deliverables, even though they might seem like not a lot, but we want you to be successful and really take the time to set up something that's successful. And then in terms of partnerships, so I know we've mentioned it a few times, but we really think it's important. And again, notice that it was something that wasn't always clear in the previous proposals. So please share details about your partnership and any buy-in that you have. So if you're not necessarily officially partnering with an organization or a community, but there is strong buy-in, please make sure to share that. We do ask for letters, supporting letters in the full application, but not for this stage. But if you have any specific support that you think would be beneficial for us, you can write a sentence or two in that section. I'm just going to pause. I see a question. Or no, it was answered. Sorry about that. Are the communities served involved in the design decision making? So again, I know we mentioned that, but providing details on how our community is involved and how they're involved in the design. What does your governance look like, your leadership, your project team? Doesn't have to be, you know, this is the first stage, so you don't have to provide a full kind of one page on that, but if you can just be clear on who's involved and how, that really helps us determine, you know, how this project is beneficial to specific communities. And then clearly demonstrate your commitment to gender-based analysis plus and how you plan to integrate it. So really talking about your organization and how you look at addressing different realities in your work, and also if there's specific investments, so specific parts of your budget that need to go, for example, to transportation or childcare, things like that, we welcome them and you can definitely include them, recognizing that it's a bit different right now because of the pandemic. So there's limitations in some areas of what you can and can't do in person, but we definitely want to hear from you on how you plan to make sure that your work is accessible and addressing different realities. And then finally, demonstrating how you plan to monetize your project and how it connects to the Social Finance Fund. So again, how is this really a program that, sorry, not a program, an initiative, or it could be a program, but that eventually will generate revenue. So even if you're in the early stages, really having a vision for this eventually being something that someone wants to invest in is something that really helps us also understand where you're coming from. Seeing a few questions. Okay, I see people are in and out. Don't worry, we are recording and we will send you the recording. And again, Sigal and myself are more than happy to connect with you to answer any specific questions that you have. So I think that's it from our end, and I don't see any other questions for now. If you, again, the resources on our website right here, and then if you have questions, you can connect with us. We will be sending the slides and we will also be sending the recording. I'm just going to give a few minutes for anyone that wants to write any questions they have, since we're here and we're happy to share.
Thanks, Al. I think I'll jump in. There was a question earlier about, I think it was Aja, who asked about the maximum amount of funding. And so it's kind of a straightforward answer that you have a maximum limit of up to 50,000 to apply for funding. And so Aja looked at the list of organizations that were funded in the first and second cycle, and majority of them applied for the 50,000. Which is not surprising. So I just want to clarify that one priority of the Canadian Women's Foundation is to, if successful, approve funding for the amount that the organization requests for. So meaning that if your organization applies for, say, 35,000, we don't necessarily reduce the amount in your proposed budget. And so if successful, you receive the 35,000. And if you apply for 50,000, again, we wouldn't reduce that in any way. And so at the full application stage, when we work with organizations and invite them back, if you are successful past that LOI stage and submit a full application, if there's items in your proposed budget that are ineligible, then we work with you with that particular organization to see how to make the budget as feasible or as viable as possible. So just wanted to just add that point.
Thank you, Sigal. Great. Any other questions? You know, it was a lot of information. Sometimes it takes a few minutes to think through it. Really exciting to hear that a few people will be in touch and interested in putting forward an application. Great, I think we can wrap up. So thanks to everyone for joining, and we look forward to connecting with many of you.
Yes, thank you everyone for taking the time out of your days and your busy days and schedules. We know that the pandemic has affected everybody differently, and you've really taken the time to take part in the session and be active. And Sally and I are here for you if you need any clarifying answers to these questions, or as you work through your application process, we'll try to respond to your questions. So with that, thank you, Sally, thank you, Michelle, and thank you for everyone on the line for the session today. Really appreciate your questions.